very much, Mary.
Thank you. It's actually my pleasure also to welcome you with my co-chair, Ellen Johnson-Sirleaf, who will be arriving a little bit later on, to this second in-person meeting of the Africa-Europe Women Leaders Network. And I do want to warmly thank Ambassador Fergal Knighton and his wonderful team at the Irish Mission to the UN for not just hosting us, but providing us with this very welcoming breakfast. I also have to thank all of you for coming and for giving our Women Leaders Network priority. I see Ngozi trying to find her seat here. You know, I know how many calls there are on your time, all of you, and I really deeply appreciate that you see this network as being a serious one with not just discussion, but action following discussion, which we try to have. I want to explain the procedure. For the next half hour, more or less, and it will be live streamed, we will reflect on Africa-Europe relations, remembering the summit in February and reflecting on how relations have not gone forward in the same way, in fact, have weakened, to put it that way, particularly with the attack by Russia on Ukraine and the terrible war that has caused so much suffering and so much death, the dispersal of so many refugees, but also problems for developing countries, particularly African countries, in rising food, fuel, and fertilizer prices. So we'll break then after that session just before 8 o'clock, and I hope we can have a group photo just down there. If we're very disciplined, women are very disciplined. The men might be a problem. We have some very good men here too. Anyway, we'll break and have the group photo, and then shortly after that, we will focus on, with Chatham House rules, the safe space that we created for this Women Leaders Network. We'll focus on the commitment at COP26 to double climate adaptation finance by 2025, and the need for a financial facility for loss and damage. And my co-chair, Ellen Johnson-Sirleaf, will have joined us, I hope, by then, and will guide us during that segment. And we do hope that we can perhaps issue a statement at the end. We have not at the end of the meeting, but following the meeting, when it's been cleared and looked at by people. And I know some in official capacities may not sign, but nonetheless, I think it's good. It will be our second statement. I think it's important that we have a voice at times, and particularly on those two issues. So now I'm being very brief because I have the enormous pleasure of inviting the Deputy Secretary General, Amina Mohammed, to speak. Amina, I heard about a new initiative that I hope you'll mention in passing. I think it's called Gabby.
Yeah, nice young lady.
She's young.
She's very young.
But she's going to grow.
She's going to grow, yes.
Okay. Well, over to you, Amina, please. Thank you.
Thank you so very much, Mary, all my sisters around, and a couple of brothers that have joined us today. And I just want to add my thanks to the Irish Mission and the team. You do this over and over and over again, and that's it. That is solidarity for us and a much needed space. We've 50 days left to COP, and I think the last time I was in Cairo, I was told about 70 days, and it just seems to be going so fast. But there are 3 bus stops before then. There is the UN General Assembly, there are the annual meetings, and of course the G20. And when people talk about the G20 today, they almost don't want to talk about it. But I have to say, kudos to Indonesia for keeping it alive. It could have been otherwise, and they make great efforts there. We all attend. It's an Africa COP, and it is a COP of implementation. And that, I think, right at the forefront is important, that message is driven day in, day out. What is of concern, of course, is that the promises and the homework given to us in Glasgow are in peril, just as a 1.5 degree is. In our last meetings in Rotterdam, it was evident, and it was so in Cairo, as we addressed many of the issues that we were looking to. It is, of course, our conversations and the efforts that we make today's adaptation, and I'm sure we'll be talking about the finance piece, loss and damage, but not to forget the mitigation, because that too has a major place. And if we look at our NDCs now, there's not much action on that. If anything, it is rolling back. So to keep those up front and center. We did look to even the low-hanging fruits, using existing tools and platforms and introducing early warning system hasn't moved. We measured it in Cairo just a few days ago, and it really hasn't moved. Our insurance, the ARC, which Ngozi, of course, stood behind, and now we have to lift further. It's such a low-hanging fruit. Give people a chance to put things in on prevention so that the loss and damage itself. I know Mia Motley said that she was offered the undertaker the other day when she talked about loss and damage. So I think it's really critical. Going to Egypt, we have, I think, one major challenge. Everyone needs to be in the room. Whether they deliver or they don't, they still need to be in the room. And that for me is the greatest concern, because I don't see that happening right now. I will tell you, at UNGA, we have a climate roundtable. Disappointing that it is going to be developing countries talking to developing countries. This is a bad sign. Not even with our IFIs can we get them in the room. So this is really, the signal going in the wrong way. We still have 3 days, so I hope that we will be able to try to make some sense as to why they should be in there. The really important things that we need to put on the table are the transitions, because through them we can get the adaptation. It is not true that adaptation is not ready. I heard in Rotterdam that if we don't do mitigation, therefore what's the point of doing adaptation? This is scandalous. And I think that we need to correct that. That comes from our partners. I heard that outdated, and it does not have any traction today, is to talk about justice and solidarity. That is nonsense. And that's what we all fight for day in, day out here, and what we have done. And these are the things that need to get into those conversations of those tools that have been made available. I know that we have the opportunities of doing something on debt and SDRs, and really welcome the new RST that I hope will come up in October, which will be focused on what we need to do. But with the recent events in Pakistan, goodness me, loss and damage doesn't matter. Absolutely it does. And I really don't know how much more we have to do, say, and evidence to get leaders to take the action that we need to. So we ended yesterday, we launched Gabi, you're right. It is an Africa initiative. It's the first time we're coming back even in New York in person. It just showed how much appetite there is to come together to do something. It has been a long journey of the last 3 years, Zooming and Teamsing, but to get back in person and to move the movement to where we need to have it. And COP is a really good demonstration to say the world is back in action. We might not be on track, but we're back in action, and to make that absolutely so. Gabi is about bringing business, it's African business, with the rest of the world, and it has broadened and deepened, and the focus was on climate, was on finance, but it was on the opportunities, recognizing Africa taking ownership of its governance issues, of its conflict issues, but just moving ahead. The young people, young women, saying this is the way we're going, and if you're on the train, fine, we might get there slower if you're not, but we're going. It's unstoppable, and that's where we are at. So let me stop here, because I know we've got a lot to pack in, and just be very grateful for this opportunity to voice concerns, but that around this table is the solidarity, around this table is the can-do. And thanks to Hala for always keeping us on our toes. Every email I see, I know it's full of actions. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Amina, for those words, which are words we have to take very seriously, because when you, from your leadership role, express such concern about what we are not doing enough of and what we are not doing right, that is serious. But then you, as you said, you mentioned the positive. Gabi, we want to link with Gabi, our Women Leaders Network. Will you introduce us some stage?
Introduce. There's a few around the table.
Okay, I will do. I know Hala spoke about it with me last night. Kristalina Georgieva, IMF, would you please? Yes, you just press. Yeah.
Thank you, Mary, for bringing us together. Good morning, strong women and strong men that dare to join us. I am going to second what we heard from Amina. We are failing in speed, we are failing in scale. And we only have one thing to celebrate today, and it is African leaders are embracing the fight against climate change, and especially the need for adaptation wholeheartedly. When the three of us were in Rotterdam, it was so uplifting to hear the voices of presidents in Africa talking about the criticality for their people, for the world to wake up on the urgency to act on climate change. It is regrettable that there were no more partners there, but hey, the three of us were there. And the most important thing about those of us who attended is that we so much converge on message. And let me tell it from the side of the IMF. One, clearly, we are at the last stretch of the road when we still can win the fight against climate change. It is paramount that we grab that last opportunity our generation has to provide a better foundation for the next generations. And I looked at some of them around this table. We can survive recession. We can survive inflation. We cannot survive unmitigated climate change. It is as simple as that. So we have to integrate in our thinking, as much as we are concerned about the heavy moment we live through, that responsibility we bear. Yes, the context we meet today is not easy. We have been hit by a shock, then another one, then a third one, shock upon shock upon shock. In 3 years, we are hit 3 times: the pandemic, the war, and now cost of living crisis. But we also have seen, especially this year, the devastating impact of climate change everywhere. No continent has been spared. My second point is that acting means each and every one of us, within what we do to integrate climate considerations fully. We have a member of our board of directors here. I am proud to say that the IMF board of directors adopted the climate strategy. Never mind, there was some time when people were saying, what climate IMF? They don't belong together. And we are now bringing it in everything we do. We integrate climate considerations in policy analysis. We integrate it in financial sector assessments. We integrate it in our data work. I look forward to the day when I would look at data and it would be for us growth, unemployment, inflation, budget deficit, and then carbon intensity, climate vulnerability. And we are moving in this direction. And of course, we are a financial institution, so we have to put money where our mouth is. And that is where the resilience and sustainability trust comes into play. Amina, yes, October, it will be effective when we go to our annual meetings. By the end of the year, we would have at least 1 or 2 approvals of programs that would direct financing for long-term structural transformation for countries that are high emitters, concentrating on mitigation, for countries that are vulnerable to climate shocks, concentrating on adaptation. And many African countries, actually 19 African countries as of today, has said, well, that is very interesting. We want to include it in our programs. What is the revolutionary piece of it? Long-term financing, 20 years maturity, 10.5 years grace. Never the fund has done long-term financing. And there was, again, some skepticism. Should the fund do it? Well, transformation takes time. If we are to be successful, we have to do it the right way. And I want to finish with my last point. So we at the IMF, we are striving towards a motto for our work that is 3 words, very simple: care, dare, act. Care for the well-being of people and our planet, especially for vulnerable people. Dare to do things differently because the world is changing and the IMF also has to change. But most importantly, act. When we met last time, I told you we are moving on integrating climate. I can say today the IMF is systemically significant institution in the fight against climate change. We care, we dare, we act. Thank you, Mary.
Thank you very much, Kristalina. I think we're going to take that on board in the Women Leaders Network, care, dare, and act as part of our DNA as well. Ngozi, please, just hit the.
Well, thank you so much, Mary. And this is the first time I've been able to join since I took over the WTO. So it's nice to see everyone and to greet all of you. Nice and familiar faces around the table. As Kristalina and Damina said, we just come from an adaptation meeting in Rotterdam.
Were there any European?
The Dutch Prime Minister.
The Dutch Prime Minister.
Yeah.
He came for the photograph, right?
Yeah.
We did have some. To be fair, we
They
did have some.
ministers.
We had ministers,
Yeah.
Yeah.
and France stepped up with 2 billion pledge. So that was something.
There
Sorry.
was some,
Something,
it's
but-
true. They sent ministers, but I think the presidents is what Amina and Kristalina alluded to. The fact that presidents came
Mhm.
and they were expecting to see prime ministers and presidents.
Yeah.
And
We were, by the way, we were in Europe. We didn't ask them to come to Africa.
Yeah, exactly.
You know, I think we have to be. No. Sorry,
Yeah.
I'm
Yes,
So
interrupting,
they
but it
need
was-
the
I agree,
ministers
That's not
to
acceptable.
represent them. But I think I want to start with that. And just ask ourselves the question. So it's noticeable that those who should be in the room maybe are not appearing in the room. Of course, let's be a bit charitable. These are people facing 400% increases in energy prices and a winter that may get them into political difficulty. So things in Europe are pretty difficult. Politicians, you have to be realistic. They think about the now, what they have to do. So I'm not trying to say any excuses, but that being the case, we need to ask ourselves, really, maybe in the Chatham House portion, what needs to be done differently? Because obviously meeting like this,
Mhm.
lamenting, giving the numbers, which I'm 2 or 3 that I like to give, and noticing the absence is not helping.
Mm.
So I just want us to step back a little bit and say, what is it? Is the message about what's happening on the continent not being communicated in the way that grabs the right attention? What is it about the way that this message is out there that we need to change? So that's the first question I'll pose to the group. Maybe we don't, but I just think something must be wrong if we can't get these people into the room. So that's point 1. I think the second point I want to make is that as part of that message, somehow we need to get some of these numbers and statistics presented in whatever way we can. If the IPCC says that 80% of the people vulnerable to climate shocks are in sub-Saharan Africa,
Mhm.
that really is a huge number. If the latest World Bank estimates on poverty show again that 2/3 of the world's poor people are going to be on the African continent, that is a really important number. If the African Development Bank says that 5 to 15% of GDP per capita growth is being lost annually in their estimates on the African continent, I mean, those are just 3 striking numbers that really hit me each time I think about it. So what is it about these very amazing numbers and worrying numbers to me that people are not really getting? So that's the first thing. From the standpoint of where I stand, I think the issue of the financing is incontrovertible, and the issue of the break of trust, in that we have been talking about this Rather, I know 100 billion is a lot, but then again, it's not. To be honest with you, I mean, if the world can mobilize $14 trillion to respond to the pandemic, and which was the right response, but I'm not saying it wasn't. But then you talk about 100 billion, and it starts begging the question: what really is the issue here? So we must find a way. Poor Crystalline, I just reached out to her in sympathy because she's become the lifesaver. The RST has become the thing that everybody is hanging on. But the RST, she's done 40 billion, might double it as you're just saying. But really, there has to be some other measure that has to go. It cannot be this that is going to help solve the issue. So again, the question to us is, how do we present this information that 100 billion is a rounding error in what the world can do? So that's the way that I see it. The third point is from the point of view of trade, which is what I'm primarily concerned about. I've also been thinking and worried and stepping up the fight. I mean, people were used to seeing trade as part of the problem of climate change, in terms of its logistics, of course, the carbon emissions from the logistics of trade, some products, the way they are traded, are damaging to the environment. If you talk about products that might entail deforestation and all that. So this is the image that people have. But people never thought about trade as part of that solution. And this is of the solution to and it is such a huge part. We are all focused on finance, but I'm going to keep repeating this message in every forum. When I got to the WTO and started looking through what could be done and what should be done, it really hit me. We are doing our flagship report this year for the first time on trade and climate. And we're going to launch it at COP27. We've been talking to Mahmoud about how to do that well, so as to demonstrate some of the things that could be done. Now, if you just step back, as I said in Rotterdam, trade is an adaptation tool. And people just don't realize it, whether it's for short-term adaptation or long-term. It is critical. If you're hit today by a typhoon, or as is happening in Puerto Rico right now, or by some other phenomenon, in the short term, you can't recover unless there's a free flow of trade. Because where are you going to get the food if you don't have food to feed your people? The resources to recover, to repair infrastructure, to rebuild, to put in all those adaptation infrastructure which you need to do, they all come through trade, most of them. So if we don't maintain a free flow of trade, we're in trouble. And this is not something people are grasping. And I want to emphasize it because that's what messed us up during the pandemic. Big time. What happened? At the end, COVAX got donated billions of dollars. I was there. We had this money, but we couldn't get the vaccines from India to Africa because of what? Export restrictions by the government at the time. Now, back up a little. India had difficulty producing the vaccines because some of the things in the vaccine value chain, the inputs they needed, were coming from the US. And the US had the Defense Production Act, which said limited the exports of those inputs to India. So India couldn't produce because of the US export restrictions. The Africa could not buy because of India's export restrictions. So I'm just telling you, even if we mobilize this finance, but countries decide that there's an event, and therefore the first thing for me to do is to secure my own domestic resources and not allow trade to flow, then we're still going to have our countries in trouble. And therefore, as we're talking about all this financing, we really need to focus. And that's what I'm trying to do. I'm bringing it to your attention so we can work together on issues of export restrictions and prohibitions, high tariff barriers, non-tariff barriers that may stand in the way. So we are going to be working on that. I'm trying subtly to see whether at some point we can get an agreement among our members that will restore a freer and less expensive flow of environmental goods and services that will ultimately help us. So I'll just stop it there, but there's a lot of food for thought and a lot of work ahead of us. But let me end on an optimistic note. I actually feel like we have the solutions.
Yeah.
And that is what I think the frustration is. You have the solutions, so how do you get everybody to focus on delivering them? But we do have them. Thank you.
Yes.
Thank you very much. I absolutely share your last point. We have the solutions. It's the political will. It's the prioritizing. It's all of the things the three of you have been saying. And it's the means of implementation, as you know so well. The SDGs, the finance, the trade, the technology, the Addis Ababa agreement of 2015. I have to honor the fact that I said we would break at 8 o'clock. Damalona, I'd love to hear from you. I don't think, have we time to hear a word from Damalona? Yes. Okay. Because after all, you hosted us for our first in-person meeting in Kigali.
Okay, thank you, Mariam. It's great to see everybody again. Thank you for coming to Kigali. Kigali was a very important moment because we're talking about the just energy transition. And the just energy transition isn't only something that happens in the developed world, but it's even more important in the developing world. So as we speak today, as we look at all these things that's going on, it isn't okay that we still have 1 billion people in energy poverty. And it isn't okay that, most of these people are women and children around the world. We have all the solutions, but the funding and the flows are just not coming to the continent. Africa barely gets 4 billion of energy investments, and not all of that is renewables. The unjust and the unfit and not being equitable nature of it has played out with the Ukraine crisis, right? There seems to be like when it comes to energy security, we can do whatever we want, but then you look at the continent and you look at how people are really, really suffering from it, and you wonder why is there no fair way of actually looking at this. So at the UN, there's a global crisis response group of which the DSP chairs, and I'm part of the leads on energy. It's actually energy, food, and finance, because you can imagine how they're also related. But on the energy piece, we're really kind of pushing the boundaries. It's important, and we also have to realize that for Africa and developing countries as a whole to progress, the developed world has to use less. So energy efficiency is the number one thing we can actually really do to change this curve. And we're seeing it now as energy bills rise, people are using less energy. The other thing that we are really championing is the use of the development of what does a proper voluntary carbon market really look like for the African continent. Because the voluntary market as it is now does not take into consideration certain archetypes that are unique to Africa, like displacement of diesel and petrol gensets. People don't see it around the world, so they don't see the importance of removing that. And then finally, I hope this is Chatham House rules, what we realize is that there's still about 27 billion in some of the DFIs that are funding that has been committed, but it hasn't been spent. So this is money that's already committed. So while we're looking for new money and looking for new initiatives, this money already exists. And it's important that we come together and figure out how to spend this money. So I'm going to the Global African Business Initiative now to talk about the just transition. And I'll be happy to share any information with any of you on what it really means to have a proper, just and equitable transition. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Damilola. I think all four of you have really set a scene for us. Our task in the Women Leaders Network is primarily to build on the trust we have already with each other, to deepen that trust and become a kind of bridge going forward to how we resolve these problems. Because the leadership is lacking, and we really have to, step up. And what are your 3 words again?
Care, dare, act.
Exactly. So can we now go for a quick photo, because some have to leave, but I'm happy that quite a number are going to stay with us, which is great. We'll just go down to the end of the room and then
We are meeting. We have something to do. So,